Okay, so this is section 8.3, the final section of chapter 8. These are your objectives for this section. Okay, so beginning with the election of 1796, we're going to see some things that are uniquely American at this point in time. And the first thing is that we're going to have a peaceful transfer of power from one presidency to another presidency. There's no war that breaks out between the political parties. Even though they're competing with each other, they still manage to give up power to the other party without question, really. Where if, this might have been happening in Europe, you would have seen bloodshed, just violence usually. So this is a major kind of turning point in history where we have this peaceful transfer of power that takes place. So the election of 1796 goes to John Adams, and it's a very close victory. They kind of like to remind Adams that he only won by 3 votes. Adams, if you remember, is a part of the Federalist Party. And the way that the system is at this point in time, his vice president is going to be Thomas Jefferson, who is technically the guy that he was running against. But until we get to the 12th Amendment, this is how the president-vice president situation is going to work. It's the guy who has the second largest amount of electoral college votes gets to be vice president. So that would be Thomas Jefferson for this particular election. Okay, so during his administration, we're going to have several foreign affair issues. Following the signing of Jay's Treaty, if you remember from the last section, France is kind of upset that we even went and negotiated with Britain, because remember, they had initially been at war with each other. So now France kind of turns on us and starts to seize our shipping. And they're going to sever diplomatic ties with us, and there's going to be all of this tension with the French. So now there's a possibility that we might have to go to war with the French. And so we want to send our own diplomats over there, our own ambassadors over to France to kind of negotiate this out and try to guarantee that there's going to be peace between our countries. But unfortunately, at this time, remember the French Revolution happened, and the government in France has not been stable since then. It's been up and down, changing leaders quite frequently. And the French foreign minister, Talleyrand, he has several French diplomats that are going to approach the Americans that go out there, and they're going to let them know, hey, if you want to deal with our leaders, because right now there was a board of leaders as well leading France. There was 5 directors. They said, if you want to talk to our leaders, you're going to have to pay us $250,000 for each director you want to speak to, and $12 million total in a loan to France. Otherwise, we're not going to even talk to you about negotiating peace. And our ambassadors pretty much said, no. We are definitely not going to pay you a bribe just for you to hear us out. There's no guarantees for anything. It's just for us to talk. We will not pay you anything. Check out that YouTube clip. It has a little cartoon about the XYZ affair, which is what this is going to become called, because they will not, Adams doesn't want the names of the French diplomats released, so they refer to them as X, Y, and Z. But you can watch that little cartoon, and it does a pretty good job of explaining it, of explaining the situation. Okay, so now tensions are just growing even more. We feel insulted by the French. Congress is going to approve a much larger army. We're going to actually get the official establishment of our Navy during this time. And Adams actually decides that we really shouldn't go to war. This is a bad idea. We're not really prepared to go to war with a country like France. And so he's going to seek peace with France, even though this is going to completely ruin his chances at re-election. So by this time, Napoleon is in power in France, and so Adams will negotiate with him, and what pretty much happens is that the French will agree to suspend our Treaty of Alliance, which, if you remember, was the treaty that said we would always, forever, be their ally and come to their aid. So it suspends that, so we don't have to live up to that promise anymore. as long as the French don't have to pay for any shipping damages. That should say damages. Okay. And so we are able to avert war with France as well. So now we get, and so these are technically successful situations for the Adams administration. And so he'll be more popular than he ends up being at the end of his presidency after he deals with these foreign affair problems. So then on the next slide is going to take us to probably the worst decisions that John Adams makes as president. Okay, so the Federalist Party is really aware of the criticism that's coming their way from the Democratic Republicans. And because tensions are really high and we've been kind of war ready for some time, the Federalist Party is going to push forward these 4 acts. And together they're known as the Alien and Sedition Acts. And they're pretty much targeted against the Democratic Republicans. So the Alien Acts, there's three acts together, and they are going to place restrictions on immigration, and mostly on immigration from countries that are going to sympathize with the Democratic Republicans. And they also allow the president to expel or imprison, so to pretty much deport or put in jail anyone, any immigrant that he feels is suspicious, or that he is concerned, I don't know, might be a spy, or is going to, be up to sabotage or something like that, is going to be against what he thinks is the country's best interest. But it leaves it pretty vague and open for the president to just put whoever he really wants to in prison, which is kind of scary. The next part of this is the Sedition Act, which, really goes against the freedom of speech that was established in the Bill of Rights. So the Sedition Act says that anti-government activities like riots or protests, okay, or anything that anyone prints or says that is negative about the government or the president, they can end up in jail for or be fined or both. And there's going to be several people that, and most of these people that are saying things against the government are Democratic Republicans. It's like a party competition here. So several people will end up in jail and pay fines. Matthew Lyon is the one that your book mentions, who spends 4 months in jail and ends up paying a $1,000 fine for saying some things that were not so nice about John Adams. So this is kind of where John Adams' legacy is at, which is kind of sad. He's a very intelligent man, but he's going to be very well known for allowing the Alien and Sedition Acts to go through during his presidency. His wife, Abigail Adams, very intelligently tells him that this is a horrible idea, but John Adams was kind of paranoid. Remember I told you guys that he wasn't really well liked and kind of insecure, and I think that comes out in his approval of these acts. Okay. The Kentucky and Virginia resolutions are really important in the development of our country because they're going to pretty much lead us to the Civil War. The ideas that Jefferson and Madison, because those are the guys that write these, put forth in these resolutions are going to end up leading the South to leave the Union someday. Not yet, but in the future of the United States. Okay. So Jefferson's response is the Kentucky resolutions, and James Madison will write the Virginia resolutions. And remember that these guys are the leaders of the Democratic Republicans. Pretty much the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, I don't know if I already said they are the response to the Alien and Sedition Acts. They support the rights of the states to determine whether or not a law is constitutional. Okay, remember that Democratic Republicans are very strong advocates of states' rights, that we should have a strict reading of the Constitution, so they're strict constructionists. And so these resolutions, pretty much, they present the ideas of compact theory and nullification. Compact theory says that when all of the states ratified or agreed upon the Constitution, that was a contract or a compact. Remember, like the Mayflower Compact? It's a contract that we all agreed to. And if the federal government does something which the states view as breaking that contract, then the state has a right to either not follow that law, which is really what nullification is. So if the state looks at a law, says that is not constitutional, they're able to nullify that law and not follow it within their state. And eventually this will lead to the idea that if the federal government does something that is unconstitutional, the states have the right to leave the union. If the federal government breaks the contract, we are no longer bound by the contract, and we don't need to be a part of the union. Okay, Adams, towards the end of his presidency, he's the first president to go live in Washington, D.C., which will be named after George Washington. And we are approaching the election of 1800, which eventually will be known as the Revolution of 1800, and you can argue about whether or not that's a good label for that. But the candidates for this election will be Republicans will nominate Jefferson and Burr, Federalists will nominate Adams and Pinckney, and it's a very, very close election. It's decided in the House of Representatives, and Jefferson comes out the winner. And then this is where we finally say, hey, these presidential elections have been getting kind of crazy. It's very strange that our vice president and president would be from different political parties. And so the 12th Amendment will occur after this election. So now Adams, he is the last Federalist president, leaves office. But before he does that, he's going to really shape the face of the judiciary for the next few decades in the United States. So you might be wondering how he does that, and we're going to get to that to the next slide. But I want to mention really quickly that during this time period, the president doesn't take office until March. Even though the election would happen in November, the president doesn't take office in January like he does now. The new president doesn't come into office until March. So there's a really long period of time where the current president is aware that these are his last months in office. So what Adams does with his last months and even last days is that he himself doesn't pass, but the Judiciary Act of 1801 is passed. And this act is going to allow for more federal judges to be appointed. So because the Federalists had lost their power in the House of Representatives and the Senate, the judiciary is their last branch to exercise any power. So Adams is going to appoint John Marshall as the Supreme Court Chief Justice in his last days. And Marshall is going to be a very influential leader in our country. He's going to be on the Supreme Court for something like 34 years. And many of the decisions made in his court still influence us today. So this act pretty much leaves it up to Adams to pack all of these courts with federal judges or Federalist judges who are going to be sympathetic to his party. So that's what he does. They're called the midnight appointments because supposedly Adams is signing these appointments up until midnight on the last day of his presidency. Okay. Over time, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson have this kind of love-hate relationship. They're bitter rivals, they have opposing political views, but at the same time, they really do respect one another, and they've lived through so much of the country's just pivotal moments together. They've been through the Revolution together, they've been through the creating of the Constitution together, and so they also have this friendship, and it kind of goes back and forth, and eventually they kind of call a truce, and they say that they're not going to talk about politics when they write letters to each other, but they do. But they kind of make a promise to not argue about it and to not become angry with one another about it. And so as they grow older, they have a really nice friendship, and we have a lot of letters between the two of them. And they actually die on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Both of them die on the exact same day, 4th of July. And it's kind of sad, like John Adams, when he's passing away, he says, well, you know, at least Jefferson's still alive, and John Adams doesn't know, because Jefferson lives in Virginia, that Jefferson has already passed away a few hours before John Adams. Okay, so here's your section review questions. Here's your paragraph shrink. Rivalry, war, negotiation. Okay, prepare for a short quiz tomorrow. We will begin reviewing for your exam, which should take place next Monday or Tuesday.